Today I will tell you a story that begins on the night of a wedding rehearsal, when my daughter-in-law leaned close to me, her smile sharp as glass, and hissed the words that would change everything. She said, "You are nothing but an embarrassment on our special day." I stood frozen, as if her voice had struck my very bones. I did not argue. I did not cry. I left quietly, letting them believe I was defeated. But I was not. One phone call later, by morning, the perfect marriage they bragged about began collapsing before it even started. And what I carried back into that house shocked them in ways they never imagined. Before we step further into this journey, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Here you will always find grandma life stories told with honesty, dignity, and the quiet strength that defines a life well lived. My name is Amelia Carter. I am 65 years old. My life, for all its turns and losses, begins each day in the same way, here, in the small garden behind my house. The roses bloom faithfully, no matter how heavy the storms, and I tend to them every morning. I kneel down, touch the soil still damp from the night rain, and trim away the fading petals. There is something comforting in this ritual, the way life insists on renewing itself. When my husband Robert was alive, we built this garden together. He planted the rose bushes, I planted the jasmine. He believed flowers were proof that beauty was worth the effort. Now, years after his passing, I keep this space as our shared legacy. Every cut of the shears, every breath of morning air keeps him near. After I finish with the roses, I carry the basket of cuttings inside and place the kettle on the stove. The hiss of steam fills the kitchen, and soon the gentle scent of jasmine tea curls through the room. I pour the tea into my favorite porcelain cup, its rim chipped, its blue glaze faded from time. Robert gave it to me on our 20th anniversary. The crack across its surface is a flaw, but to me it is a reminder that love, even with its breaks, endures. I carry the cup to the table where my leather-bound journal waits. Its pages are filled with 3 years of ink, each word written in violet. Robert once teased me about my insistence on purple ink, calling it dramatic. But for me, it was never about drama. It was about keeping memory alive in color. I open the book, smooth a blank page with the palm of my hand, and begin writing. The nib scratches softly, steady as my breath. I write about the roses, about the way the morning air carried the scent of rain, about Sophie's laughter when she visited last week. I write about Ethan too, my son, though the words catch in my chest. He is 42 now, with a daughter of his own, and a woman he has chosen to marry. I want to write only joy for him, but my pen hesitates. There are things I have seen in Vanessa, his bride, that I cannot ignore. A hunger for perfection so sharp it cuts everything in its path. A smile polished to shine, but hollow behind the eyes. Still I write, because the journal is where I hold myself steady. I pause, sip the tea, and let the warmth fill me. Outside, a bird calls. The light shifts through the blinds. For a moment, the world is soft and safe. Then, as if carried by the breeze, I hear Vanessa's voice again. Not from the garden, not from the house, but from memory. Her words, cruel and quiet, slither back to me. "You are not family. You are an embarrassment." I set down the cup, close my eyes, and let the sting wash over me. It would be easier to forget, but forgetting means allowing her truth to overwrite mine, and I will not. Every day I hold on to these small rituals, the roses, the jasmine tea, the journal inked in violet. They are the anchors that keep me whole, the proof that my life has weight and dignity no matter what others say. As I trace one last sentence across the page, I whisper to myself, every day I hold on to these little things, as if I am holding on to myself. The morning sun spills through the window, golden and clear. My hand rests on the page, my heart steady now. The story I'm about to tell you does not begin with triumph, but with insult. It does not begin with celebration, but with betrayal. Yet within it lies something stronger: justice, memory, and the quiet power of a woman who refuses to disappear. I still remember the first time I stepped into Ethan and Vanessa's new house after they had set the date for their wedding. The air smelled of lilies and expensive candles, but underneath it all there was something sharp, like a perfume that lingered too long. Their mansion stood on a cul-de-sac lined with trimmed hedges, the kind of place where neighbors compared the height of their fences and the shine of their driveways. As I crossed the threshold, my shoes clicked against marble floors that seemed polished for inspection rather than comfort. Vanessa greeted me with her usual brightness, arms spread as if she were welcoming royalty. Her voice was sweet, almost musical, but every note was calculated. "Amelia, look at the drapes. Imported silk. The chandelier? Straight from Florence. We want the wedding to match this house. Perfection is not a luxury, it's an expectation." She clasped her hands dramatically, her diamond engagement ring catching the light like a weapon. I smiled politely, but inside I felt a shift. Perfection, as she described it, was not about love. It was about image, about the way others would whisper and applaud. Her obsession was not hidden. It was painted on every wall, embroidered in every detail. Ethan appeared behind her, shoulders tense under his tailored shirt. He kissed her cheek absent-mindedly, then turned to me. "Mom, what do you think? She's been working so hard. The guest list is over 200 now, and the catering, well, it's a bit more than we planned, but you know how these things go." His words tumbled quickly, as if he hoped speed would soften the edges. I studied his face. My son had once been carefree, laughing with dirt on his hands as he helped his father plant those rose bushes in our garden. Now lines carved into his forehead told a different story. He looked proud but also trapped, like a man carrying too heavy a load while insisting it was fine. Vanessa looped her arm through his. "It's not just a wedding, Amelia. It's a statement. People need to see us as strong, successful, untouchable. Anything less is unacceptable." Her smile never faltered, but her grip on Ethan's arm tightened until his knuckles whitened. I lowered myself into a chair near the window, letting their words wash over me. My hands folded gently in my lap, yet my heart beat louder than I wanted. "And what about happiness?" I asked softly. "Where does that fit into all of this perfection?" Vanessa laughed, light but cutting. "Happiness is in the details. When everything is flawless, people respect you. Respect brings happiness." Ethan nodded, though he did not meet my eyes. I could tell he wanted my approval, but what he needed was my truth. I gave him neither, only silence. From the hallway, Sophie appeared quietly, holding a sketchbook against her chest. She was only 15, yet her eyes seemed older, sharper. She perched on the stairs, unnoticed by her father and Vanessa, watching the scene unfold. I caught her gaze and offered the smallest smile. She did not return it, but she held it like a secret. Vanessa moved from one corner of the room to another, pointing at centerpieces, flower arrangements, the champagne tower that would stand taller than a man. Her voice carried like a conductor demanding an orchestra to play louder. "The cake alone is 8 tiers with gold leaf. Imagine the photographs. Imagine the envy." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Vanessa, maybe we should—" "No, Ethan, we should not cut corners. This is once in a lifetime. Your mother understands. Don't you, Amelia?" She turned to me with eyes that dared me to disagree. I placed my hand around my teacup, though it was empty, as if its warmth could steady me. "I understand that appearances fade quickly," I said calmly, "but the cost of keeping them often lingers longer than anyone expects." Her smile tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, caught between us, his loyalty torn like fabric, stretched too thin. Sophie scribbled something in her sketchbook, the sound of pencil scratching breaking the silence. I wondered what she was drawing. Perhaps not flowers or gowns, but shadows. Children often see what adults try to hide. As the afternoon stretched, Vanessa continued with lists, demands, visions of grandeur. Ethan followed, nodding, agreeing, until his voice sounded like an echo of hers. I watched them from my chair, the gulf between my world and theirs widening. My world was roses, journals, tea brewed in porcelain chipped by time. Theirs was chandeliers, imported drapes, and debts hidden beneath layers of polish. The contrast was not lost on me. When I finally stood to leave, Ethan walked me to the door. His voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "Mom, thank you for everything you've already done. I promise, after the wedding things will calm down. Vanessa just wants it perfect." I laid my hand on his arm, his muscles tensed under my touch, like a man bracing against a storm. "Perfection is heavy, Ethan," I told him. "Don't let it crush you before you know what happiness even feels like." He opened his mouth to answer, but Vanessa called his name sharply from inside, and he stepped back. The door closed gently, but the weight of it echoed in my chest. On the walk back to my car, I felt the air grow colder. The trees lining the street rustled, whispering truths that no chandelier could silence. I realized then that the world my son was building was not built on love, but on fragile illusions. Illusions are costly, and the bill always comes due. Sophie's small face flashed in my mind. I thought of her sketches, of the way her eyes tracked every word, every gesture. Children carry silent records of what they witness. One day she would remember all of this. One day she would see clearly which parts of her family were made of truth and which parts were made of glass. As I drove away, I rested one hand on the wheel and the other on my lap, fingers brushing against the folded corner of my violet journal page. In that moment, I knew that my role was no longer to shield my son from consequences, but to stand steady when they finally arrived. Life had taught me that lessons ignored in peace are delivered loudly in crisis. And though I sat alone in my car, I did not feel powerless. I felt clarity rising like the steam from jasmine tea. I could not stop what was coming, but I could decide how to meet it, with dignity, with memory, with the quiet strength of someone who refuses to disappear. The rehearsal dinner was bathed in soft amber light. Strings of fairy lights hung like constellations across the wide garden of the country club, each bulb glowing as if it held a secret. Laughter floated on the warm evening air, the clinking of glasses chiming in rhythm with the low hum of conversation. From a distance, it looked like a dream, a perfect picture to be captured and framed. Up close, it was a theater where every movement had been rehearsed to appear effortless. I moved quietly between tables, adjusting a napkin here, smoothing a crease there. My hands knew the work. They had folded laundry in dim kitchens, pressed flowers into books, and steadied the shoulders of a child learning to walk. Now they arranged linen beneath crystal goblets, a service unnoticed by those who drank and smiled above them. The scent of roasted meat and garlic bread mixed with the sweetness of roses from the centerpieces. Each table was set like a stage, silver cutlery gleaming under the fairy lights. I could hear the servers whispering to each other, rushing to refill champagne flutes, their trays wobbling slightly as laughter erupted from the head table. Vanessa sat there in the center, draped in ivory silk, her hair catching the light as though spun from glass. She raised her glass to her lips, smiled wide for the crowd, then set it down before the smile hardened into something else. Perfection again, always perfection. Her eyes darted across the room, cataloging details, scanning for flaws, ready to erase any imperfection that dared appear. As I bent to fix a chair angled slightly off, I felt her approach. Her perfume reached me first, sharp and sweet, expensive in a way that made the air heavy. She leaned close, her face curved into the kind of smile that photographs love but truth despises. Her voice slipped out like a blade hidden in velvet. "You're not family, you're just an embarrassment. Don't ruin our perfect day." The words cut through the music and chatter, so quiet only I could hear them, yet they rang louder than any toast made that night. I straightened slowly, keeping my hands folded in front of me. My heart thudded against my ribs, but my face did not betray it. I turned slightly, catching the reflection of her grin in the glass of a wine bottle. For a moment, I saw not a bride but a performer desperate for applause, terrified of silence. My lips curved into a small smile, not of agreement but of understanding. She wanted to wound me into protest, into creating a scene she could later point to. Instead, I gave her nothing. Ethan stood a few feet away, speaking with two groomsmen about seating arrangements. His shoulders stiffened when Vanessa's words left her mouth. I saw it in the angle of his neck, yet he did not turn, did not speak, did not shield me. He poured more wine into his glass and pretended he had not heard. That silence hurt more than Vanessa's hiss. I inhaled slowly, the scent of jasmine from the nearby bouquet filling me like armor. My voice stayed calm, steady as a stone in a rushing river. I won't ruin anything, Vanessa. I promise. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if confused by the lack of resistance. She expected tears, maybe a plea. Instead, she found stillness. With a shrug, she floated back to the table, her laughter rising an octave too high, echoing across the garden like glass breaking. I remained where I stood, smoothing the cloth once more. Inside, a storm gathered, yet I held it as one holds a fragile cup of tea. Careful not to spill, careful to keep its heat contained until the right moment. My mind whispered questions. When did my son's love become silence? When did respect turn into absence? I had no answers, only the certainty that I was not invisible, even if they wished me to be. Sophie appeared near my side, her sketchbook clutched against her chest. She glanced at me, eyes wide, lips pressed thin. She had heard something, maybe not all, but enough. "Grandma, are you all right?" she asked softly. I touched her hand briefly, giving it the gentlest squeeze. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go enjoy the evening." She hesitated, then nodded, stepping back toward the children's table. Yet her eyes lingered, watchful. Children see what adults try to bury. As the evening continued, speeches began. Friends of Ethan spoke of loyalty, of youth, of promises. Vanessa's father raised his glass, praising the union as if it were a business merger, full of prestige and influence. Laughter and applause followed each toast, but beneath it all, I heard the hollow echo. I sat at a table near the edge of the garden, far from the laughter, the fairy lights dimmer here. The music played, couples twirled on the makeshift dance floor, and still the words pressed against my heart. "You're not family. You're just an embarrassment." I thought of Robert then, of his steady hands, his voice that never once made me feel small. If he had been here, he would have stood beside me, spoken truth into the noise. But he was not, and the duty of dignity fell on me alone. I lifted a glass of water, letting the condensation cool my fingers, and whispered inwardly, "Every insult reveals more about the one who speaks it than the one who receives it." That thought became my anchor. Ethan walked past my table once, his tie loosened, his smile stretched thin. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. He looked away quickly, but in that instant I saw the weight pressing on him. Fear, pride, shame, all braided tightly into his silence. My son was not cruel, but he was weak in a way that hurt more deeply. Weakness can wound as sharply as malice. The night wore on. Fairy lights twinkled, champagne glasses emptied, and laughter grew louder to mask the cracks. I stayed until the final toast ended, then quietly slipped away before the applause could fade. No one noticed, or maybe they noticed and chose to ignore. Either way, I left with my head high, the words Vanessa had spoken burning not as a scar, but as fuel. In the car, the night air pressed cool against my skin. The stars above glittered like distant witnesses, silent but unyielding. I placed my hands on the wheel and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet seep in. Pain pulsed in my chest. Yes, but so did clarity. Her words had not erased me. They had reminded me of who I truly was. Family was not defined by the approval of a bride obsessed with mirrors. Family was written in the soil of gardens tended, in the journals filled with violet ink, in the steady love of years past. As I drove away, the lights of the country club shrinking in the rearview mirror, I whispered to myself, "This was the first cut, but I am not broken. I am sharpening." The night after the rehearsal dinner, I returned to my small house and set my purse on the kitchen table. The silence felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the sting of Vanessa's words. I did not open my journal. For the first time in years, I let it sit closed on the shelf, violet ink waiting unused. Instead, I reached for the folder Clara had once pressed into my hands. It was thick, its edges worn from my hesitation. Tonight, hesitation had no place. I filled the kettle with water, the tap squeaking faintly as if echoing my decision. When the steam began to whistle, I set out my porcelain cup, the one with the crack that ran like a scar down its side. I dropped jasmine leaves into the pot and poured the water slowly. The fragrance rose in soft tendrils, curling around me like a patient reminder that even fragile things could carry warmth. As I waited for the tea to cool, I spread the papers across the table. Mortgage documents, deeds, signatures that bound names together. My late husband's handwriting was absent. This was all mine. Clara had insisted I protect myself years ago, and I had listened, though not fully. Now I understood her wisdom. My hand hovered over the papers, fingertips grazing the ink where my name confirmed what my heart already knew. I had not been erased, no matter how Vanessa wished it. The lamp cast a golden circle over the table. My eyes traced each line until clarity settled in. I did not feel anger. I felt a steady kind of strength, like roots gripping deeper into the earth during a storm. I lifted the teacup, breathed in its steam, and finally reached for the phone. The country club answered on the third ring. "Good evening, this is Samuel, event manager. How may I help you?" His tone was polite, practiced, a man accustomed to smoothing chaos into calm. "This is Mrs. Carter," I said, my voice even. "The groom's mother." A pause. "Yes, Mrs. Carter. Everything is set for tomorrow. The ballroom is being prepared, the catering finalized. Is there an issue?" I let the silence stretch a heartbeat longer. "Let the wedding proceed," I said, tasting each word before it left me. "But send every unpaid bill to my son's name. I am no longer responsible." The line was quiet. I imagined Samuel shifting in his chair, brows furrowed. "Mrs. Carter, forgive me, but the contract was signed under your name. You've been the point of contact for every arrangement. Are you certain you wish to—" "Yes." I cut gently but firmly, like trimming a rose stem. "I am certain. This celebration belongs to them, not me. If they consider me an embarrassment, then I will not embarrass them with my support. They may enjoy their perfection, and they may pay for it as well." His voice softened. "It is unusual to make such changes on the eve of an event. It will create difficulties for the couple." I lifted the folder, pressing my palm against the weight of the papers. "Difficulties reveal truth, Mr. Samuel. If their foundation is strong, they will stand. If it is not, then no chandelier can hide the cracks." For a long moment he said nothing. Then a sigh traveled across the line. "I understand. The invoices will be redirected immediately." "Thank you," I replied. "Do not mistake me for bitter. This is not vengeance. It is clarity. Sometimes the kindest act is to stop shielding others from their own reflection." The sound of pen scratching came faintly from his end as he noted the change. His tone carried both hesitation and respect when he spoke again. "It will be done, Mrs. Carter. I wish you peace in your decision." "I already have it," I answered. When I hung up, the house was silent once more. But it was no longer the heavy silence of insult. It was the steady quiet of resolve. I sipped my tea, now cooled, and let its floral warmth spread through me. Across the table, the documents lay like soldiers aligned, ready for what tomorrow would bring. I thought of Ethan then, his face avoiding mine at the dinner, his silence louder than any insult. He would not expect this. Vanessa certainly would not. To them, my role was to give endlessly, to carry the cost of their perfection like an invisible mule. Tonight, I had stepped out from that harness. The jasmine lingered on my tongue, bittersweet. I placed the teacup down carefully, aligning it with the papers, a symbol of ritual meeting decision. For years I had been content to fight with kindness, believing patience alone could mend cracks. But patience without respect becomes permission for cruelty. Tonight, I revoked that permission. I folded the documents back into the folder, sliding it neatly to the center of the table. My fingers rested on its cover, pressing gently as if sealing not only the paper, but the promise within myself. I whispered softly into the quiet kitchen. "You tried to make me disappear, but tomorrow you will see just how present I am." The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, rattling faintly as if in approval. I did not write in my journal that night. Some stories are not written in ink, but in action, and some words are best saved for when they will cut through the noise like thunder. I rinsed the cup, placed it back in the cabinet, and switched off the lamp. In the darkness, I felt no fear, only anticipation. Tomorrow, the lights of perfection would blaze brighter than ever, but behind them, a shadow they did not expect would rise. The morning of the wedding broke with a clear sky. Sunlight poured through the windows of the Richmond Country Club, spilling across white marble floors and reflecting against crystal chandeliers. By the time I arrived, every corner of the ballroom was glowing. Flowers draped over arches, candles flickering in polished holders, the air thick with roses and champagne. It was beautiful, yes, but the kind of beauty that felt brittle, as if one wrong note could shatter the illusion. An usher guided me past rows of tables dressed in ivory linens and tall vases of orchids. My seat was not near the head table, nor even among the middle rows where close friends gathered. I was led to the very back, beside the doors where waiters carried trays of hors d'oeuvres. Sophie sat waiting, her dress pale blue, her sketchbook tucked discreetly under the table. She offered me a small smile, one that was both tender and knowing. From my chair, I could see the entire room. Guests glittered in gowns and tuxedos, their laughter rising like bubbles in champagne flutes. But I also caught the glances. Whispers floated near me, soft but sharp. "Strange, isn't it? The mother of the groom way back there? And why is the bride's family giving all the toasts?" Each word slid into my skin like needles. I kept my hands folded, fingers resting on the edge of my violet journal tucked in my purse. I did not write in it. I did not need to. This moment would etch itself into memory without ink. Vanessa glided through the crowd like a swan, her gown a cascade of ivory silk. Her smile never faltered, teeth gleaming in every flash of the photographer's camera. Yet when her eyes flicked toward me at the back table, the smile hardened, brittle as porcelain. She turned away quickly, clutching Ethan's arm as if to signal possession. Ethan, in his black tuxedo, looked the part of a groom in a glossy magazine, but his eyes betrayed him. They were restless, darting toward guests, toward servers, anywhere but toward me. When he lifted his glass to greet a table of his colleagues, the motion was too quick, the wine sloshing dangerously close to spilling. His laugh rang hollow, too sharp, as though trying to drown out something only he could hear. Sophie leaned close to me, whispering, "Grandma, everyone notices." I touched her hand lightly. "Then let them notice," I murmured. The ceremony passed in practiced perfection, vows spoken beneath an arch of roses, applause timed as if rehearsed. Cameras flashed, capturing every kiss, every held gaze. But as dinner began, the cracks widened. At the head table, Vanessa's laugh rose louder than the music. She was trying too hard, each gesture exaggerated, as though commanding the guests to believe in her happiness. Ethan followed suit, nodding and smiling, but his hands trembled each time he lifted his glass. I heard the waiter behind me murmur as he passed trays of champagne, "This looks like a picture from a magazine, but it feels off." His companion agreed with a quiet hum. They didn't know I was listening, yet their words mirrored my thoughts exactly. When the first course was served, lobster bisque in delicate porcelain bowls, the guests leaned together, whispering. I caught fragments of conversations. "I thought the groom's family was hosting this. Why is every speech about the bride's side? Look at his mother. Why would she be seated there? Something's not right." My face remained calm, my spoon lifting slowly, though the bisque tasted of ash in my mouth. Every whisper confirmed what Vanessa wanted to hide. The illusion was cracking, and she could not hold it together. During the toasts, Vanessa's father stood proudly, boasting of his daughter's grace, their family's success, the elegance of the evening. Applause filled the room, but I noticed how eyes slid toward me, lingering, questioning. No one raised a glass for me. No one mentioned my years of sacrifice, the down payment that had bought Ethan and Vanessa their home, the countless quiet gifts that had made this day possible. That silence was louder than any toast. Sophie scribbled in her sketchbook, her pencil scratching steadily. I wondered if she was capturing faces or words, or perhaps the invisible fissures spreading across the perfect surface of the evening. Then, just as the music swelled for the dance floor, a man in a dark suit approached Ethan at the head table. He bent down, slipped a folder into his hands. From my seat, I saw the color drain from my son's face. His fingers shook as he opened the folder, eyes scanning quickly. Vanessa leaned in, her painted smile still fixed, but her lips parted slightly as she read over his shoulder. Her voice, though hushed, carried enough venom to sting across the room. Over 80,000. Ethan, she dumped everything on us. This will ruin us. Ethan's hand clenched the stem of his glass so tightly I thought it might break. He forced a smile, rose shakily, and lifted the glass toward the guests. To love, he said, voice unsteady. Wine spilled over the rim, dripping onto the linen. Gasps fluttered through the tables, and the laughter dimmed. The band struck up a tune, but it could not cover the whispers. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, their perfect night no longer seamless. I sat quietly watching. I had not ruined their day. I had simply stepped aside, allowing the weight of their choices to settle where it belonged. Sophie reached for my hand, squeezing tightly. "Grandma, they see it now." I nodded, eyes fixed on the glittering chandeliers. "Yes," I whispered, "they see." As the night wore on, the music grew louder, the laughter more forced. Vanessa's smile wavered at the edges. Ethan's jokes fell flat. Every bill, every whispered doubt, every crack in the facade hung in the air like smoke that no fan could disperse. I sat at the back table until dessert was served, a towering cake adorned with gold leaf. Guests applauded as it was cut, but the applause was thinner, less certain. I could see it in their eyes. Perfection was collapsing, not with a crash, but with a quiet unraveling. When I finally rose to leave, I did not slip out unnoticed. Eyes followed me as I walked toward the door, my spine straight, my steps measured. I felt their curiosity, their pity, their judgment. Yet I also felt something else, something deeper, the undeniable truth that silence can be stronger than applause, and dignity sharper than any insult. The chandeliers sparkled above us, their crystals catching the light like frozen rain. Laughter still drifted across the ballroom, though it sounded thinner now, brittle against the weight of expectation. I sat quietly at the back table with Sophie, her small hand resting in mine. I could sense something shifting in the air, as if the night had been holding its breath for too long. Then it happened. The country club manager, dressed in a dark suit with a clipboard in hand, made his way through the sea of tables. His polished shoes clicked softly against the marble floor. He did not go to the kitchen, nor to the bride's family. He went directly to Ethan. I saw my son's face tense the moment the folder touched his hands. He opened it quickly, eyes flicking across the pages, and with each line, the color drained from his skin. His jaw clenched. The smile he had practiced all evening collapsed into something raw and frightened. Vanessa leaned close, her perfect curls brushing his shoulder. Her voice, though hushed, carried through the fragile silence. "Over 80,000? Ethan, this will ruin us." The words struck like a hammer against glass. Ethan's fingers tightened on the folder until the papers crumpled at the edges. He looked up, searching the room, as though someone might rescue him. But no one moved. Guests pretended to talk, their voices low, but their eyes were locked on him, on Vanessa, on the truth that had just bled through the night's perfection. I watched from the back, calm as still water. This was not revenge. It was exposure. The truth had always been here, waiting for its moment to be seen. Ethan stood abruptly, raising his glass. His hand shook so badly that wine spilled over the rim, dripping dark red onto the pristine linen. The room hushed at once. "To love," he said, voice cracking under the weight. He forced a smile, but his lips twitched. The glass trembled in the air until more wine spilled onto the tablecloth, a crimson stain spreading like a wound. The band faltered, a note off key, then fell silent. Guests froze with forks half raised. The perfection of the evening had shattered in a single moment of clumsiness that revealed everything beneath. Whispers spread, hushed but sharp. "Did you see his face? He's pale as paper." 80,000. Did she say 80,000? Why would the groom's family be buried in debt? Each murmur cut deeper than Vanessa's insult ever had. Their image, polished, untouchable, was unraveling thread by thread, right there under the chandeliers. Vanessa grabbed Ethan's wrist, hissing through clenched teeth. "Smile. Keep smiling. Don't let them see." But they already had. At my table, Sophie squeezed my hand tight, her young eyes wide and glistening. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "Everyone sees it now." I looked down at her, my face calm, my pulse steady. "Yes, they do," I answered softly. Inside, I felt no triumph, only a deep, steady affirmation. This was not spectacle for me. It was truth demanding recognition. For years they had built their castle of glass on my silence, and tonight the cracks were no longer mine to hide. The waiter nearest the head table rushed forward with a napkin, blotting at the wine that spread like accusation across the cloth. Ethan muttered thanks, but the napkin only smeared the stain wider. The more he tried to cover it, the uglier it became. Vanessa turned toward her guests, her laugh high-pitched and forced. "What a night, isn't it? Perfection has its little slips." Her voice shook, though she tried to mask it as humor. The guests chuckled politely, but it was thin, hollow. I watched the way her hand clutched Ethan's arm, her nails pressing deep into his sleeve. It was not affection, it was desperation. She was holding the illusion together with the last of her strength, and it was slipping through her fingers. Ethan lowered himself back into his chair, shoulders sagging, his forehead damp with sweat. The folder lay open beside his plate, the invoices stark and undeniable. Even from the back, I could see the black numbers printed across the page, heavy as iron. I lifted my glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it down. Around me, the whispers had grown louder. The bride's family exchanged worried glances. Guests shifted uncomfortably, and some avoided looking toward the head table altogether. What had begun as a night of spectacle was now a stage for unease, and I remained still, calm, watching. In that stillness, I felt something important. It was not the sting of vengeance, nor the thrill of exposing them. It was the weight of choice. I had chosen to step back, to stop carrying what was never mine to bear. And now the burden was finally, visibly theirs. The chandelier above flickered, a bulb buzzing faintly, casting a brief shadow across Vanessa's flawless smile. For one heartbeat, her mask slipped. I saw the panic in her eyes, the raw edge of fear where arrogance had once lived. She covered it quickly, turning to laugh with a guest, but it was too late. They had seen it. Everyone had. The music resumed, softer now, the band playing as if to fill a silence too heavy to ignore. Guests ate quietly. Conversation dulled. The glamour remained, the flowers, the candles, the gold leaf on the cake, but the spirit of the evening had changed. It no longer belonged to perfection. It belonged to truth. Sophie leaned her head gently against my shoulder, her small voice steady despite the tremor. "You're not an embarrassment, Grandma. They are." I kissed the top of her hair, my eyes never leaving the glittering head table. "Sometimes," I whispered, "the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand." And so I sat, in my simple dress, at the back of the ballroom, letting the weight of silence speak louder than anything I could have said. The ballroom emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Roses wilted on their stems, candles burned low, and the last glasses of champagne sat abandoned with lipstick stains on their rims. Laughter had vanished, leaving only the faint scrape of chairs and the muted shuffle of staff clearing plates. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and walked toward the exit. I did not glance at the head table, nor at the couple clinging to their illusion. I had no need. My silence had already spoken. The night air outside the Richmond Country Club was cool, carrying the faint scent of gardenias from the courtyard. I inhaled slowly, the chill seeping into my lungs, steadying me. My heels clicked softly on the stone path as I crossed the parking lot, each step measured, deliberate. Behind me, the glow of chandeliers still shimmered through the tall windows, but I did not turn to look. I left without fanfare, without farewell. Inside their home, not far from where I walked, another scene was unfolding. On the polished oak table in the kitchen sat a simple box, plain cardboard, its edges worn. I had placed it there earlier, carefully, like planting a seed I knew would bloom in the dark. The lid was not sealed, only folded shut. A choice, to open or to ignore. They opened it. Ethan was the first to lift the lid, his tie loosened, his tuxedo wrinkled from hours of strain. Vanessa stood behind him, her gown still gleaming, though her face bore streaks of smeared makeup. He pulled out the stack of documents, his eyes scanning the legal language. His lips parted, his breathing quickened. "What is this?" His voice cracked, though he already knew. Vanessa snatched the papers from his hands, her fingers trembling. She read quickly, her manicured nails tapping against the margins. Then she froze, staring at the note lying atop the stack. My handwriting, in violet ink, curved steady across the page. "You said I'm not family. Then treat me as your co-owner." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Vanessa's face contorted, her polished composure shattering. "No!" she screamed, her voice raw. She crumpled the note in her fist, her body trembling with rage. "She can't do this! She can't own what's ours!" Ethan sank into a chair, the papers spilling across the floor. His hands clutched his head, fingers digging into his scalp. "It's legal," he whispered. His voice was low, strangled. "She was always on the deed. I signed without reading." Vanessa spun on him, her eyes blazing. "You let this happen. You let her crawl into our lives, into our house, into our wedding. And now she's going to ruin us." Her voice rose, sharp enough to pierce through walls. Sophie, standing in the hallway, heard every word. The girl's small figure was silhouetted by the dim light, her eyes wide, reflecting the golden glow of the kitchen lamp. She did not speak. She only watched, her hands clutching the banister, her breath shallow. Vanessa collapsed onto the kitchen floor, her gown pooling around her like fallen silk. She sobbed violently, pounding her fists against the wood. The sound echoed through the house, a hollow rhythm of desperation. Ethan stayed slumped in the chair, eyes vacant, staring at the papers scattered like fallen leaves. His mouth moved, but no words came. He was drowning in a silence of his own making. Sophie's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She pressed her forehead against the banister, watching her father crumple and her stepmother unravel. The light flickered overhead, casting shadows across their faces, turning them into strangers she barely recognized. And me? By then I was already home, seated at my small desk. A cup of jasmine tea cooled beside me, steam curling into the air. My journal lay open, pen resting on the page. I did not write of anger. I did not write of victory. I wrote only one line: "Their choices have finally found their way back to them." The night deepened. In their house, grief and rage twisted into the air like smoke. In mine, silence settled soft as a blanket. The battle lines had been drawn, though no one had raised a sword. It was not about destruction. It was about truth. I knew Vanessa would not sleep that night. I knew Ethan would sit in the dark, staring at the walls, his mind replaying every signature, every silence, every time he had chosen to look away. And I knew Sophie, dear Sophie, would carry the memory of that night in her heart, the night when the glittering facade cracked wide open. The wedding had ended, but I would not let it end. The phone rang early the next morning, its sharp tones slicing through the quiet of my kitchen. I had just set the kettle on, the faint hiss of steam rising as the first light filtered through the curtains. I answered, and a calm but firm voice introduced himself as Detective Harris from the Richmond Police Department. "Mrs. Carter, we've received a report concerning you. Someone claims you may be experiencing cognitive decline and could be a victim of financial elder abuse. We'd like you to come in for a conversation." For a moment, silence pressed against my chest. I could almost hear Vanessa's voice behind the accusation, dripping with false concern. My hand rested on the edge of the counter. The cool granite steadied me. I inhaled slowly and said, "Of course, Detective. Tell me the time, and I will be there." I hung up and poured the boiling water over the jasmine leaves. The fragrant steam curled upward, delicate and calm, the exact opposite of what Vanessa had tried to paint me as. I took a sip, let the warmth slide down my throat, and opened the folder Clara had given me. Every page, every receipt, every contract was a shield. Vanessa wanted to cast me as weak. I would arrive armored with the truth. At 10 o'clock sharp, I walked into the station. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, a mix of sterility and order. Detective Harris met me at the door, a man in his early 40s with tired eyes but an air of patience. He gestured toward a small interview room. The blinds were half closed, the hum of the overhead light steady, like a metronome ticking through the seconds. He offered a polite smile. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Carter. Please sit." I placed my leather satchel on the table, smoothing my skirt before lowering myself into the chair. "You've been told I'm not capable of handling my affairs," I said evenly. "Allow me to show you otherwise." He leaned back, pen ready, as if expecting a defense riddled with confusion. Instead, I pulled the first stack from my folder. 3 years of bank statements. I slid them across the table. These show the transfers I made to my son Ethan and his wife Vanessa. Each entry is noted, each amount traceable. He scanned the pages, his brow furrowing. I waited, hands folded, until he nodded slowly. "Next," I said, drawing out another set of papers. "These are copies of checks written for their expenses, car repairs, utility bills, groceries. You'll see my signature, my account numbers, every detail." The pen in his hand stilled. He looked at me more carefully now, no longer seeing the frail figure Vanessa had described. I opened the next folder, the deed to the house. The embossed seal caught the light as I laid it on the table. "I am not a guest in their lives, Detective. I am a co-owner of the property they live in. My investment was never a gift. It was structured legally, and these documents prove it." His eyes widened slightly as he read the line. "Owner of record, Amelia Carter, 35%. Finally, I reached into my bag for my phone. I unlocked it, scrolled, and pressed play. The room filled with Vanessa's voice, shrill even in its whisper, recorded at 2 o'clock in the morning. "Amelia, normal people don't destroy weddings over feelings. Maybe you need help. Maybe you're sick." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and undeniable. Detective Harris leaned forward, replayed the clip, then set the phone gently on the table. For a moment, he was silent. Then he exhaled, tapping the pen once before speaking. "Mrs. Carter, the documentation is thorough. The recording, well, it clarifies intent. I have no reason to believe you're incompetent or being exploited. Quite the opposite." I felt a small pulse of satisfaction, not triumph, but justice. I met his eyes. "Detective, I've lived long enough to know that silence can be a weapon. They thought by painting me as weak, they could erase the truth. But paper holds memory. Ink remembers what people forget." He closed the folder, pushing it back toward me. I'll file this as unfounded, but if you'd like, I can connect you with resources for elder abuse prevention. I shook my head gently. Thank you, but I think I've already begun protecting myself. As I walked out of the station, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. Leaves rustled underfoot, the world steady again. Vanessa had tried to trap me in her story of weakness. Instead, I had written my own chapter of strength. Later that day, I sat in my garden, trimming the roses. The petals fell soft into the basket, their fragrance rising. I thought of Sophie, of the eyes that had watched silently as truth cracked open behind closed doors. Someday she would remember this moment, not as scandal, but as proof that dignity can be defended. The war had shifted. Vanessa had struck first, but her weapon had crumbled in her hands, and I, with nothing more than ink and memory, had turned the tide. The oak-paneled office smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of room where words weighed heavy and silence pressed like a stone. Clara had chosen this place for a reason. Its solemn air left no room for denial, no space for frivolity. The golden lamplight carved shadows across the polished table, and I sat at one end, my papers neatly stacked before me. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. She sat rigid, her pearl earrings trembling with each sharp movement of her jaw. Her voice cracked like glass, sweet at the edges, but jagged at the core. She always interferes. This is our life, not hers. Clara, calm and deliberate, adjusted her glasses. Her words dropped like a gavel. This isn't interference. This is ownership. Mrs. Carter is not a guest in your household. She is a legal co-owner of your property. The word ownership seemed to echo against the walls. Vanessa flinched, as if the sound itself had struck her. Ethan sat beside her, shoulders hunched, his tie loosened as though it were strangling him. His silence was louder than any protest, his eyes fixed on the floor like a child caught in a lie too large to explain. I folded my hands, letting the pause stretch long enough for them to feel it. Then I spoke, each word measured, my tone as calm as the jasmine tea I brewed each morning. You've called me an embarrassment. You've told me I'm not family, so let us deal not in sentiment, but in fact. Here are your choices. I slid the folder toward them. The papers whispered across the polished wood, and the air thickened. Option 1, you buy out my 35% share at market value. Option 2, we sell the house, and the proceeds are divided according to ownership. Option 3, you accept my continued presence as co-owner. Every renovation, every refinance, every decision will require my consent. Vanessa's hand shot forward, snatching the folder. She skimmed the lines, her manicured nail tapping furiously against the page. Her face flushed crimson. You're cruel. You want to humiliate us in front of everyone. I met her fury with stillness. No, Vanessa. I am not humiliating you. I am refusing to be humiliated. There is a difference. Clara leaned back, watching the exchange with quiet precision. Her eyes flicked to Ethan. Mr. Carter, you seem silent on this matter. Do you understand the implications? Ethan finally raised his head, his lips parted, but no words came. The muscles in his jaw clenched. He looked at me once, just once, before lowering his gaze again. Vanessa slammed the folder shut. This is madness. You're punishing us because you feel left out. I allowed myself the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of clarity. Left out? No, my dear. I am firmly in the center now. You placed me here with your own words. You wanted me erased. Instead, you've underlined me in bold ink. Her breath came fast, shallow. We can't afford this. Ethan, tell her. We can't. Ethan's voice cracked when it finally emerged. It's a lot of money. Over $90,000. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Clara broke it with a steady tone. Then perhaps the two of you should have considered the weight of your words before dismissing the woman who financed your foundation. Actions have consequences. Vanessa's chair scraped back abruptly. She stood, pacing, her heels clicking like gunshots against the wooden floor. She wants to destroy us. I shook my head, my voice steady as stone. No. I want you to see yourselves. For years, I shielded you from consequence. I wrote checks when you faltered. I paid bills when you turned away. I absorbed every insult in silence, but silence is no longer my gift to you." Clara's pen scratched across her notepad. The sound was final, like nails sealing a coffin. "Mrs. Carter has made her position clear. The law is on her side. You may negotiate, but you cannot erase her stake, not with tantrums, not with accusations." Vanessa stopped pacing. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes glassy with rage. She leaned across the table, her words spat through clenched teeth. "You think you've won, but people will see what you've done. They'll know you've torn your own family apart." I met her stare without blinking. Families are not torn apart by truth. They're torn apart by lies, by entitlement, by the belief that love comes without respect. I didn't start this unraveling. I'm simply holding the thread. Ethan pressed his palms flat on the table, as though steadying himself against a quake. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. His silence was its own confession, a proof of weakness louder than any accusation. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with an unspoken verdict. Vanessa stormed out first, her perfume trailing behind like smoke after a fire. Ethan followed, his steps heavy, his shoulders bowed. Clara looked at me, her eyes softening. "You were steady," she said quietly. "Most people would have raised their voices." I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. I've learned that voices raised often drown themselves, but words delivered with truth carve deeper than shouting ever could. I stood, the weight of the folder balanced against my hip, and walked toward the door. The lamplight followed me, golden and solemn. For the first time, it wasn't I who carried the burden of silence. It was they. The meeting with Clara had ended hours earlier, yet the weight of it lingered as I sat at my kitchen table. The lamp glowed softly, casting long shadows across the walls, and my journal lay open, though my pen had not touched the page. I was lost in thought when I heard the faint creak of the back door. Sophie slipped in, her small frame carrying a quiet determination beyond her years. She hesitated near the doorway, clutching something against her chest. I looked up and offered her a gentle smile. "What are you doing here so late, sweetheart?" She crossed the room slowly, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the tile, and sat across from me. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a small notebook on the table. Its cover was worn, corners frayed, pages thick with use. She pushed it toward me, her eyes searching mine. "I wrote everything they said to you," she whispered. Her voice was steady, though her lower lip quivered. "In case you need proof." For a moment I couldn't speak. The weight of her words pressed against my chest harder than any insult Vanessa had ever thrown. My hand reached across the table, resting on hers. Her skin was warm, fragile, but her spirit was steady. I opened the notebook slowly. Inside, Sophie's neat handwriting filled the lines. Dates, times, direct quotes, each page a silent witness. She had written down Vanessa's words at the rehearsal dinner. "You're not family. You're just an embarrassment." She had written Ethan's silence, marking it with a small note. Dad looked away. My throat tightened as I turned the pages. Sophie had been watching all along, recording what others dismissed as passing cruelty. Her notebook was not a child's scribble, it was testimony. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw the strength in her eyes. "Why did you do this?" I asked softly. She lifted her chin. "Because they lie, Grandma. They lie so well that people believe them. But I heard everything. I wanted you to have something no one could deny." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, though I refused to let them fall. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently. "You've given me more than proof, Sophie. You've given me your courage." Her face flushed, and she ducked her head, embarrassed by the weight of her own bravery. I flipped further through the notebook. She had captured moments I hadn't even noticed. Vanessa on the phone, whispering late at night about how I was losing my mind. Ethan sighing when bills arrived, muttering, "Mom will cover it." Even the look Vanessa had given me at the wedding reception, scribbled in Sophie's description. Her smile was wide, but her eyes looked sharp, like knives. The details struck me. A child's honesty has a purity adults cannot mask. I closed the notebook and placed my hand firmly on its cover. Do you realize what this means? This isn't just paper. It's truth bound in ink. Sophie nodded, her eyes glistening. I know. That's why I hid it. I didn't want Dad or Vanessa to find it. I thought, maybe one day you'd need it. Her words cracked something inside me. Not pain, but awe. She had seen more than I'd ever intended her to see, and in her silence, she had carried the burden of witness. The clock ticked softly in the background, the air thick with jasmine from the tea cooling beside me. I reached into my satchel and slipped the notebook inside, alongside the deeds, bank statements, and recordings. It did not look out of place. Among the cold, hard documents of law, Sophie's notebook was the one thing alive with conscience. I leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You must promise me something, Sophie. Promise me that no matter what happens next, you will hold on to this strength. Don't let the bitterness of others make you silent. Her eyes locked onto mine, steady as stone. I promise. The room felt different then, as though the balance of power had shifted again. Not in court, not in contracts, but in truth itself. Vanessa's lies might echo louder, Ethan's silence might weigh heavier, but Sophie's notebook sang quietly with integrity. I rose from my chair, pulling her into my arms. She pressed her face against my shoulder, and for the first time in many days, I felt warmth rise in my chest. Not victory, not even relief, just the reminder that I was not alone in this fight. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. I should go. Dad will notice if I'm gone too long. I nodded, brushing her cheek with the back of my hand. Be careful, and thank you, my darling girl. She slipped out the door, the night swallowing her small frame as she disappeared down the path. I stood there a moment longer, the cool air brushing my skin, carrying the faint scent of roses from the garden. When I returned to the table, I opened my journal. In violet ink, I wrote, "The world keeps records in paper, but sometimes the truest records are kept in the heart of a child who refuses to forget." I closed it, set it beside Sophie's notebook, and let the silence settle around me. The weeks after the wedding unfolded like a theater curtain slowly tearing. At first, Vanessa tried to take control of the story. She called friends, arranged brunches with extended family, and painted me as the villain. She told them I was bitter, that I had meddled in their marriage, that I was an old woman who could not let go. She said my actions were cruel, and that I wanted to ruin her happiness out of spite. For a short while, some believed her. Whispers traveled through the neighborhood, pitying glances followed me at the grocery store. I kept my head high, carried my basket, and allowed silence to shield me, because I knew masks do not last forever. Soon, the cracks began to show. Vanessa's stories contradicted themselves. In one version, I was senile. In another, I was cunning. In one tale, Ethan had begged me to stop. In another, she had graciously endured my presence. People began to notice the inconsistencies, and suspicion settled like dust on polished glass. At a family gathering I chose not to attend, cousins exchanged hushed words. Funny, isn't it? For all her talk of dignity, Vanessa never mentions the money. She seems more worried about the house than the vows. And Ethan, have you noticed how quiet he's been? The tide shifted slowly. What she had intended as poison began to reveal her own reflection. Then came the phone call from Clara. Her voice, usually steady, carried a trace of urgency. Amelia, I think you should hear this. Someone who works with Ethan sent me a recording. Vanessa didn't know she was overheard. Later that evening, I sat in Clara's office, the lamplight warm against the shadows. She pressed play, and Vanessa's voice filled the room, no longer coated in sugar, no longer dressed in perfection. It was jagged, raw, and venomous. Your mother's money is the only reason we look successful. Vanessa's voice cracked with fury. Do you think I married you for love? Ethan, wake up. I married you because her money opened doors. Without it, we're nothing. And if she pulls away now, Everyone will see what we really are." The words struck harder than any insult she had ever thrown at me directly, not because they surprised me, I had suspected as much, but because they were so naked, so unguarded. The mask had fallen. The recording ended with silence, but in that silence, I heard Ethan's response. Nothing. No denial. No defense. Just the weight of a man too cowardly to face the truth, too complicit in his own undoing. Clara leaned back, her expression grim. "This will spread, Amelia. You don't need to lift a finger. Words like these carry themselves." She was right. Within days, the recording circulated quietly, slipping from one phone to another, whispered at luncheons, replayed behind closed doors. Friends who once admired Vanessa began to avoid her calls. Invitations stopped arriving. Her social media, once a flood of congratulatory comments, filled instead with silence. At the market, I overheard two women in line, their voices low but clear enough. "Did you hear? Vanessa admitted she only wanted Ethan for his mother's money." I always thought she tried too hard. Now it makes sense. Their laughter was sharp, almost cruel. Yet I felt no joy in hearing it, only confirmation. Ethan walked through these weeks like a shadow. He showed up at work, but his colleagues avoided his eyes. He joined Vanessa at dinners, but the seats around them slowly emptied. His silence had once been his shield. Now it was his prison. For me, life went on in smaller, steadier ways. I tended the roses, trimmed their stems, and wrote in my journal with violet ink. Sophie visited often, sometimes bringing her sketchbook. She did not ask questions, but I saw the understanding in her gaze. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat in the garden with my journal open. The words I wrote were not for them, but for myself. When masks fall, it is not the sound of breaking that matters. It is the silence that follows. When the world finally sees what was hidden all along, the world was seeing now, not because I shouted, not because I sought revenge, simply because truth, when given time, always breathes. Vanessa's perfect image had dissolved. Her voice, once polished for public admiration, now replayed in whispers as evidence of her greed. Ethan's silence weighed heavier than complicity. It was the sound of a man exposed as weak, unable to defend even the illusion of love. And me? I remained steady, rooted, like the roses I cared for each morning. They had tried to paint me as invisible, irrelevant, embarrassing. Instead, their own words had painted the truth for everyone to see. I set the table myself that morning, though my hands moved slower than they once had. The porcelain cups gleamed pale against the dark oak, the steam of jasmine tea rising in gentle curls. The fragrance filled the room, sweet, earthy, calming. I wanted no shouting, no chaos. This meeting would be my ceremony, my final offering of truth. The doorbell rang. Ethan and Vanessa entered together. He looked worn, his shoulders hunched under the weight of invisible chains. She, though dressed immaculately as ever, carried a face cracked by sleepless nights. The mask was still there, but it was fraying. I gestured toward the chairs opposite me. "Sit, drink. We have things to discuss." Vanessa rolled her eyes slightly, but obeyed, settling into the chair with a stiff spine. Ethan sat slowly, his gaze flickering between me and the teapot, as though the steam itself unnerved him. I poured each cup, the liquid amber, the sound soft and deliberate. For a moment we sat in silence, the only noise the tick of the clock and the faint hiss of the kettle still cooling on the stove. Then I slid a folder across the table. "These," I said calmly, "are the records. Every bill I paid, every loan I covered, every quiet rescue you never acknowledged." I began to list them, not as accusation, but as fact. My voice was steady, each figure cutting the air with precision. 3 years of utilities, $40,000 in debt repayments, $70,000 for the down payment on this house, countless smaller checks, groceries, repairs, insurance. I never asked for repayment. I asked only for respect. Ethan swallowed hard, his knuckles white against the porcelain cup. Vanessa scoffed, tossing her hair back. "And you enjoyed it. Don't pretend you didn't. You liked being the savior, the martyr. It made you feel powerful. I held her gaze, unblinking. If I enjoyed being the savior, Vanessa, I would not be letting you save yourselves now. I would not be handing you back the burden that always belonged to you. She leaned forward, eyes flashing. You're punishing us. That's all this is. I shook my head slowly, the steam from my tea drifting between us like a veil. No, I regret one thing only, that you turned love into obligation and a mother into a wallet. I regret that my giving became your entitlement, that my silence became your excuse. Ethan finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Mom. He faltered, looking down into his tea as though the ripples might offer escape. Maybe we just need time. Things are complicated. Complicated? I echoed, my tone still calm but sharp enough to pierce. What's complicated about honesty? What's complicated about gratitude? You chose silence because it was easier, and silence, Ethan, is not neutral. It is agreement with the loudest voice in the room. Vanessa's nails drummed against the folder. So what now, Amelia? What's your grand finale? You want us to bow? To grovel? I pushed another document toward them, 3 typed pages with my signature at the bottom. No, I want clarity. You have 3 choices. I raised one finger. Buy out my 35% at market value. A second finger. Sell the house, divide it as the law requires. A third finger. Or accept me as co-owner. Every renovation, every refinance, every change will carry my signature as well as yours. Vanessa's face flushed crimson. She slammed her cup down, tea splashing onto the tablecloth. You're cruel, she hissed. I did not flinch. No. Cruelty is calling someone an embarrassment at her son's wedding. Cruelty is whispering lies about her mind to police officers. Cruelty is taking love and disguising it as a right. What I am doing now is justice, and justice often feels cruel to those who've built their lives on comfort at someone else's expense. The room vibrated with silence. Even the clock seemed to pause, as if listening. Ethan rubbed his forehead, his breathing uneven. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His silence weighed more than Vanessa's rage. Vanessa stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. We'll fight you. Do you hear me? We'll fight you in court, in the community, everywhere. People will hate you for this. I sipped my tea, calm as the garden at dawn. Let them. I've lived long enough to know that hate built on lies burns itself out. Truth endures. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She glanced at Ethan, searching for an ally. But he stayed still, staring at the folder as though it were a mirror he couldn't bear to face. His silence was heavier than her fury, heavier than the steaming air between us. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice softer now, but sharper for its restraint. I am not here to destroy you. I am here to stop letting you destroy me. Take whichever path you choose, but do not mistake my calm for weakness. The days of silence are over. The words hung in the air, as unmovable as stone. Vanessa's eyes glistened with frustrated tears, though she blinked them back with a violent shake of her head. Ethan shifted, his lips parting, but the words never came. He was trapped between the woman he married and the mother he betrayed, unable to defend either without condemning himself. I gathered the papers, sliding them neatly back into the folder, and set it aside. The teapot hissed faintly, as though exhaling the tension for me. This meeting is over, I said quietly. Take your time. Choose wisely. The next move is yours. Neither of them replied. Vanessa stormed toward the door, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Ethan followed slower, shoulders bent, head bowed. When the door finally closed, I sat alone in the quiet, the fragrance of jasmine lingering like a benediction. I lifted my pen, opened my violet journal, and wrote, "Power is not in raising your voice. It is in holding your ground." I invited them back one final time, not for tea, not for reconciliation, but for clarity. The folder rested on the table, its edges neat, its weight undeniable. I had rehearsed the words in my mind, not as threats, but as truth. They entered together, though their bodies told different stories. Vanessa's heels struck the floor with the fury of someone marching into battle. Ethan shuffled beside her, his suit rumpled, his eyes dulled, hands trembling faintly at his sides. I gestured to the chairs. "Sit. We won't drag this out." Vanessa folded her arms, eyes sharp. Ethan sat quietly, his silence a wound that refused to close. I opened the folder, sliding 3 documents across the table. My voice was calm, deliberate, every word measured like a chisel carving into stone. Here are your options. 1. Buy out my 35% share, $95,000. 2. Sell the house and we divide according to the law. 3. Accept me as co-owner, which means I have equal say in every decision about this home. The papers spread like cards on a table, each one carrying the weight of consequence. Vanessa leaned forward, her face flushed. She slammed her palm against the table so hard the cups rattled. "She's destroying us!" Her voice cracked, high and raw. "Do you hear yourself, Ethan? She's trying to rip everything away from us." Ethan flinched but said nothing. His hand reached for the papers, but trembled before he touched them. I watched him carefully. "You think silence saves you, Ethan, but silence has already condemned you. Every time you let her speak for you, every time you looked away, you agreed with her cruelty. Now you must decide. There is no longer a shield between you and consequence." Vanessa's voice rose again, venom curling around each word. "You've wanted this from the beginning, haven't you? To ruin our marriage, to make us bow to you. You couldn't stand being left behind, so now you're dragging us down with you." I let her words hang in the air, then spoke softly, but with steel beneath it. "If I wanted to ruin you, Vanessa, I would have done it long ago. I don't need to bow you. I don't need revenge. I need respect. Something neither of you has offered freely." The clock ticked on the wall, each second landing heavier than the last. Ethan rubbed his temples, his breathing uneven. His eyes flicked toward Vanessa, then back to the papers. Still, no words came. I leaned forward, my voice low, unwavering. "You once told me I was not family. Today, I give you the gift of choice. Decide if I am a partner, a seller, or a creditor. But do not think you can erase me. I am here. I have always been here." Vanessa's nails scratched against the wood as she pulled the documents closer. Her lips curled into a sneer. "You'll regret this. You think people will side with you? You're an old woman clinging to scraps of control. We'll fight you until you have nothing left." I tilted my head, the faintest smile touching my lips. "And you will find, Vanessa, that the only thing you truly fight is yourselves. The world has already heard your voice. They know what you confessed when you thought no one was listening. You married my son for money, for appearances, not for love. That truth cannot be undone." Her face drained of color. Ethan stiffened, his hand finally closing over the papers, knuckles white. I sat back, folding my hands in my lap. "This is my ultimatum. 95,000. Sell the house, or live with me as your co-owner. 3 paths, all legal, all binding. Choose." Vanessa's chest heaved as she stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. "She's poisoning everything, Ethan. Don't you see? She's cutting us apart." Ethan's lips parted, but the only sound was a shallow exhale. His silence weighed heavier than her screams. I rose slowly, gathering the folder back into my hands. My tone remained even, unshaken. "You asked for perfection, Vanessa. Now you live with the cost of it. Whether you pay in dollars, dignity, or both, that is up to you." I walked to the door, holding it open for them. Vanessa stormed past me, her perfume sharp and cloying in the air. Ethan lingered for a moment, eyes lowered, hands shaking, before he followed her out. When the door closed, I returned to the table, the scent of jasmine tea still faint in the room. I traced the rim of my cup with one finger, breathing deeply. For years, I had been their shield, their safety net. Now, I was their reckoning. And though my heart ached for the boy I once rocked to sleep, I knew this was necessary. The morning of the house signing was gray and heavy, clouds pressing low as though the sky itself knew the weight of the day. I had risen early, brewed jasmine tea, and sat at the kitchen table with my violet pen resting on an open page of my journal. The steam rose in slow curls, steadying me for what was to come. Around noon, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't sharp or hurried, but hollow, hesitant, like someone who didn't know if they had the right to be there. When I opened the door, Ethan stood before me. His once pristine shirts were replaced with a wrinkled button-down, sleeves rolled halfway up, collar wilted. His face was pale, and the shadows under his eyes told of nights without rest. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. He shifted his weight, his hands twisting nervously. Then, in a voice cracked and uncertain, he spoke. "Mom, may I come in?" I stepped aside, my silence permission enough. He entered slowly, like a man crossing a threshold into judgment. We sat across from each other at the table. I poured him a cup of tea, and he held it with trembling hands but didn't drink. His gaze was fixed on the rising steam, as though searching for words within it. Finally he spoke, each syllable dragging against the weight of shame. "I thought siding with her would prove I'm strong, that I could show the world I wasn't dependent on you, that I could handle life better than Dad ever did." His eyes lifted to mine, red-rimmed, pleading. "Instead, I proved I'm weak. I failed you." The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. My chest ached, not from anger, but from the grief of seeing my son finally admit the truth when it was already too late to prevent the collapse. I placed my hand gently on the table, my voice calm, even. "Ethan, family isn't measured by houses or weddings. It isn't in receptions or the sparkle of chandeliers. Family is measured by how you treat the ones who gave you life." His lips trembled, and his eyes filled, though no tears fell. He looked away, ashamed of even the attempt. "I let her speak for me. I let her poison my silence. Every time you looked at me for help, I looked away. I was a coward." I did not deny it. Sometimes silence was the deepest form of truth. Instead, I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. My voice softened, though the steel beneath it remained. "Cowardice is not permanent, Ethan, but it leaves scars. On you and on those you hurt." He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking once before he steadied himself. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve it. I couldn't let this day end without telling you I know what I've done." The room fell quiet again. The clock ticked in the corner, its rhythm sharp and steady. I lifted my cup of tea, savoring the warmth as it touched my lips. For me, that sip was not avoidance, it was acceptance. Some things cannot be undone, they can only be carried. Ethan finally looked up again. His eyes were searching, desperate for something he could not name. Perhaps it was forgiveness. Perhaps it was release. I gave him neither in words. Instead, I let silence speak for me. My gaze held his, steady, unwavering. In it, there was no rage, no triumph, only the quiet truth that love remains, even when trust is broken beyond repair. It was not absolution. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that is more powerful than forgiveness. Ethan lowered his head again, tears slipping down at last, silent but undeniable. His hand reached for the cup, and this time he drank. The jasmine scent lingered between us, binding us in a fragile thread. When he left, the afternoon sun had begun to break through the clouds, light spilling faintly across the floor. I watched his figure retreat down the path, shoulders still bent, but carrying, perhaps, a seed of change. I sat back at the table, opened my journal, and wrote, "Sometimes the sun returns too late. But even then, the truth he speaks carves a place in the silence where healing can begin." My chest was heavy, but my heart was steady. His confession was a wound and a balm, both at once. painful but honest. And honesty, even when late, was still a kind of gift. I moved into the small apartment on the edge of the city just as the leaves began to turn. It was not large, nor was it grand, but it was mine. The balcony overlooked a quiet park, and every morning I watched the light slip through branches of ancient oaks, their shadows stretching like long fingers across the path. The air there was softer, calmer, untouched by the venom of raised voices or the weight of unpaid debts. The routine I had carried with me for decades remained. I brewed jasmine tea in my porcelain pot, the same one I had used through every storm of my life. I sat by the window with my violet pen, the scent of ink mixing with the fragrance of steam, and I wrote. Some days it was a page, others only a line. But each word was a seed I planted, proof that even when torn apart, I still chose to grow. Sophie visited often. Her footsteps raced up the stairs, her knock always urgent, as if she feared I might vanish if she didn't see me soon enough. She would sit cross-legged on my rug, her backpack tossed aside, her eyes bright with stories from school. "Grandma, we did presentations today," she said one afternoon, pulling a folded paper from her bag. "I wrote about the roses you used to grow. My teacher said it was the most heartfelt thing she'd read all week." Her words warmed me more than the tea in my hands. I reached out, smoothing her hair back gently. "You carry pieces of me with you, Sophie. That's the kind of inheritance no one can steal." She smiled, her cheeks flushing, and leaned against my knee. The weight of her trust settled softly, reminding me why I had fought so fiercely, not just for myself, but for her, for the truth she would grow up to see. As the days stretched into weeks, I heard less of Vanessa's voice and more of silence. Friends who had once praised her perfection no longer invited her near. Ethan, I knew, was learning the long lesson of rebuilding a reputation after it had collapsed. I did not gloat, nor did I rejoice. Their ruin was not my goal. My goal had been survival, dignity, and the steady hand of justice. One evening, Sophie and I sat on the balcony as the sun lowered itself behind the oaks. The sky blazed with orange and violet, streaked with thin clouds that looked like brushstrokes across a canvas. She leaned against me, holding her sketchbook open to a page filled with careful lines of the park below. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you happier now?" I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "Happiness isn't always loud, Sophie. Sometimes it's the quiet of a safe place. Sometimes it's knowing you didn't let others define who you are." She nodded as if she understood, her young face serious in the fading light. I closed my journal for the night, the violet ink still drying on the final words I had written. Then I turned to the horizon, my voice steady, carrying the truth that had cost me so much to claim. I was never an embarrassment, and I was the root that held this family. And sometimes, to grow again, you must cut away the branches that rot. The words left me like a prayer, carried on the breeze that rustled through the oak leaves. I felt no bitterness, no lingering sting, only calm. As twilight deepened, Sophie slipped her small hand into mine. We sat together in silence, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the city, while the first stars pricked the sky. The world moved on, as it always does, but I remained rooted, steady, alive. In that moment, I understood. Justice had been served, not in courts, not in money, but in truth revealed and dignity restored. My story had begun with humiliation, with whispered words meant to diminish me. It ended here, in the quiet of a new home, beside the granddaughter who had chosen to remember everything. And as the night settled fully around us, I felt something close to peace. Not the fleeting kind, but the lasting one that comes when you finally reclaim yourself.